Thank you, Ernestine and Stephen. Would you please stand if you are able as we recite the Shema and hear the reading of the Gospel? Jesus would have said this 3 times a day. We say the first line in Hebrew, and then it repeated in English, and then the rest of it in English. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Ahad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Amen. Hear these words from Luke 8:26 through 39. Then they arrived at the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. And he stepped out on land. As he stepped out on land, a man of the city who had demons met him. For a long time he had worn no clothes, and he did not live in a house, but in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he fell down before him and shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For Jesus had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For many times it had seized him. He was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles, but he would break the bonds and be driven by the demon into the wilds. Jesus then asked him, "What is your name?" He said, "Legion," for many demons had entered him. They begged him not to order them to go back into the abyss. Now there on the hillside, a large herd of swine was feeding, and the demons begged Jesus to let them enter these, and he gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the man and entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When the swineherd saw what had happened, they ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came out to see what had happened. And when they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told them how the one who had been possessed by demons had been healed. Then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them, for they were seized with great fear. So he got into the boat and returned. The man from whom the demons had gone begged that he might be with him. But Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you." So he went away proclaiming throughout the city how much Jesus had done for him. This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. Jesus takes the disciples across the Sea of Galilee to pagan territory. As I told you last week, I think that this is Jesus pushing the disciples out of their comfort zone in an effort to prepare them for their ministry. Jesus not only took them to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, but he took them to Caesarea Philippi, which is the location of the Temple of Pan, where the disciples would have seen the type of religious practice they would encounter later in Turkey. And it wasn't pretty. He also took them to Tyre and Sidon, which were towns that were originally settled by Phoenicians, who were seafaring people. In other words, they were port cities, pagan port cities, which means that they were places that had been influenced by a wide variety of cultures and people. In the not too distant future, the disciples would be forced out of Jerusalem and have to engage with many different cultures and people. Jesus prepares them for this time by giving them a taste of what they will encounter. As Luke tells the story, Jesus one day gets his disciples into a boat to go across the Sea of Galilee. In transit, they have to deal with a storm. Actually, they have to have Jesus wake up so he can deal with the storm, which is always a better choice, don't you think? When they arrive on the other side of the lake, they are met by a demonized man who approaches Jesus and calls him the Son of the Most High God. I think that's amazing, don't you? That this man who knows who Jesus is, of course it seems that every time Jesus encounters a demon-possessed person, the demons know who Jesus is. They know that he's the Son of the Most High God. In fact, they know who he is, and they fear his ability to send them back to the abyss. It's people that don't seem to know who Jesus is. Or maybe they're in denial. We do the same thing today. We think that we are so sophisticated that we don't believe that demons exist or that there's a malevolent force at work in the world. Our society believes that every mental or emotional affliction is organic in nature with no spiritual basis. And no doubt that's often the case, but as our society becomes more and more secular, we see a rise in depression and compulsive behavior and addiction. Addiction not just to drugs and alcohol, but eating disorders and a myriad number of other compulsions. If we stop for a moment and reflect, we will realize that we have many people in our society like this man, living among the tombs, living with destructive behavior that ruins their lives. This man is driven to confront Jesus, assuming the demons are assuming that he is there to deal with them. Jesus immediately begins to tell the demons to come out, to leave the man. And as part of that process, he demands the demons to tell him their name. They respond, "We are legion." A Roman legion was 6,000 men. This man has 6,000 demons tormenting him. These demons plead with Jesus not to send them to the abyss, but they want to go into the swine herd, which is nearby. Jesus complies with their request, and immediately the swineherd runs off the cliff and drowns. The destructive demonic behavior is not limited to human beings. What the story doesn't tell us is that there was a Roman outpost up the hill from that spot. And I suspect that these pigs were being used to feed the Roman soldiers. It was common for armies to take herds of pigs with them as part of their provision for a military campaign. The Roman outpost was stationed in pagan territory, so they could have hired some herdsmen to tend the pigs and keep them nearby without offending the Jews by having them on the Jewish side of the Sea of Galilee. The outpost was located high on a hill that gave a good view of the towns across the lake. Tiberias, Herod's headquarters, Capernaum, where Jesus lived, and Bethsaida. Jesus, in one move, relieves the man of his demons and deprives the Roman army of a food supply. The herdsmen run to the nearby town to tell what has happened and bring the whole town back with them. Upon their return, the townspeople find the man sitting at Jesus' feet, clothed and in his right mind. The townspeople are afraid and want Jesus to leave. You know, it's not unusual for people to be unsettled when they first experience the presence of God. I've seen it happen on several occasions. In my 20s, I attended a Catholic charismatic prayer meeting that met at the Ursuline Academy out on Vance Jackson. Went there for 10 years. A man that I knew came to town, and we took him to the prayer meeting. We knew that this man had some problems which we assumed were psychological. And no doubt that was part of it. The problems had developed after his older brother was killed by Charles Joseph Whitman, the man that shot people from the top of the tower on the UT campus in Austin in the 60s. After the prayer meeting, the man told us that during the prayer meeting, it was all that he could do to keep from standing on his chair and howling like a wolf. If he had of, no doubt, a number of people in that prayer meeting would have responded by commanding that demon to come out. Was it psychological? Was it demonic? I think maybe both. Whatever the case, it made my wife, that is my first wife, very uncomfortable, and she wanted him to leave our home. Cynthia's not that easily intimidated. That was the townspeople's response to Jesus. They want him to leave their neighborhood. They may have responded to Jesus because they sensed his holiness, or they may have been afraid of the response of the Roman soldiers when they found out that their source of food was no longer available. Whatever the case, their fear was not unjustified. The Roman army had a scorched earth policy when dealing with problems in a place they occupied. Josephus tells of an incident during the rebellion of the Jews 30 years later where the towns in that area were believed to be involved in the rebellion, and the Roman army came in and captured 10 towns and burned them to the ground, and then executed 1,000 young men that they had captured in those cities. Maybe the people in that community had good reason to be afraid. But fear is often the first and probably natural response to change in our lives. When we come up against something that's different and it makes us uncomfortable, Jesus doesn't scold the townspeople for trying to force his presence on them. But he goes to get in the boat. God doesn't force himself on anyone, but only comes into our hearts when we invite him. The formerly demonized man, no longer afraid of the presence of God that he experiences in Jesus, begs to go with Jesus. But Jesus tells the man to go and tell the people in the surrounding area what God has done for him. Evidently, that's what the man does. He goes and tells his story to anyone that will listen. The next time we see Jesus in this area, people come to him. Is it any wonder that the story of the feeding of the 4,000, which is preceded by Jesus preaching and teaching and healing, takes place in the Decapolis? Takes place where this man told his story. The man formerly known as Legion had done what Jesus asked. He went and told his story about his encounter with Jesus and how Jesus brought order to his life and delivered him from chaotic and destructive behavior. We're all called to do the same thing. Tell our story of God at work in our lives. Tell the story of God's love for us. Tell the story of God sending his Son into the world to bring order out of chaos in our lives and in our culture. Tell the story that this church is a safe place to come and be loved and cared for. It is a story that many of us have lived in for so long, we now take it for granted. It's a story that our culture plays down or twists and corrupts, but it is a story that our neighbors long to hear. It is a story of transformation. It is a story of God's love. It's the only story that will change the world. And it's up to us to tell it. It's up to us to tell it. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Would you join me in the response to the word? Elijah, afraid and running for his life, was confronted by the living God at Mount Horeb. What are you doing there, Elijah? Go out and stand on the mountainside, for the Lord is about to pass by. Now there was a great wind, a wind so strong that it split mountains and broke rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake shook the ground to the roots of the mountain. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. But after the earthquake, a fire blazed up towards heaven. The Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. God speaks to us in silence. God is still speaking. Let's join in singing our closing hymn, Forever.